Okay, welcome to a special edition of the Thursday night special. This is 90.1 FM KKFI, Kansas City Community Radio. Tonight's program deals with the movie Planet of the Humans by Michael Moore. Now, for those of you that are familiar with Michael Moore, you know he's done a number of, he's an Academy Award winning filmmaker. He did Roger and Me, he did Bowling for Combine, he did Sicko, he did a number of films, most of the movies were always controversial, but usually for the people on the right that didn't support his more progressive ideas on having better health care, or dealing with gun control, or what have you. But this movie, Planet of the Humans, has been controversial from a different quarter. It's been controversial for those who support the environmental movement, because he's had a number of controversial things to say. And we come not to bury nor to praise Michael Moore, but we come to discuss the issues that he brought up in his movie. What did he get right? What did he get wrong? And I'm going to turn it over now to Bob Grove to introduce who we have as our guest this evening.
Thank you, Bill. I'm Bob Grove, and as Bill says, we're here to talk about Planet of the Humans, new environmental documentary. It's actually written, directed, and produced by Jeff Gibbs. Michael Moore is the film's executive producer. And as Bill said, it's generated a lot of controversy among the environmentalists because it argues that green energy is not as renewable as it appears. The film basically concludes that wind, solar, and biomass do not address the planet's dwindling resources and therefore cannot be sustainable. So with us tonight, we have Bill Klaus, our KKFI producer, Dave Mitchell, who's a KKFI Radio Active magazine host and a longtime Kansas City environmental activist, Bill Griffith, formerly president of the Kansas Sierra Club and currently energy chair of the Sierra Club's Thomas Hart Benton chapter, John Fish-Kerman, lead organizer of Kansas City chapter of 350.org, James Owen, executive director of Renew Missouri, and Joy Ellsworth, development manager for the Metropolitan Energy Center. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you. Let's start with wind and solar energy. Some of the film's talking points are that it would take 15 square miles of solar farm to power a small city like Lansing, Michigan, that solar panels only run at 8% efficiency, and that many solar panels are only built to last for 10 years, so solar farms would have to be rebuilt every few decades. The film also discusses the lack of a nationwide power grid, which makes it impossible to move green energy around the country, so that there's a need to have fossil fuel or nuclear power plants idling in the background to provide power when the wind and solar is not available, and that cycling these fossil fuel or nuclear power plants up and down actually pollutes more than just running the power plant at a constant baseline. So the question is, wind and solar energy actually sustainable? And let's start with Bill Griffith, if we can. Bill?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Also, besides being involved in renewable energy in the club, in the past, I've been a project developer for a private solar firm. And when they talk about 8 cents per kilowatt hour in Lansing, or 8% efficiency of the solar panels, right now solar panels are 17 to 19% efficient. So that number is less than half. And I don't know if that was sloppy journalism or where they got that from, number one. Number two, in Lansing, they were talking about the city of Lansing was using that for peak energy, which is different than just the total electricity for the area. So that was I thought, a real sleight of hand there on what they were doing. The other one is solar panels, lasting only 10 years. I know the warranty we use and most of our competitors use was for 25 years, and they would last longer than that. It's just the warranty would end by then. So this was either real sloppiness or some type of misdirection, and I don't know where Jeff Gibbs was going with this.
Right. This is great. If you talk, they'll be able to hear you, right? So I'll just do the talking. They can't hear me, do you think?
Actually, we can hear Greg.
Can.
Just to let you know. James, you want to talk about solar cells? I know we're in Missouri. I mean, that's what you're all about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the information there was outdated. I think when you look at what the reality on the ground is versus what that film was trying to portray. I mean, look, whatever their agenda is, whatever their belief is, I think, what, you have to understand is that when you're talking about energy, there's not going to be any perfect way of doing it. I'm not going to sit here and say renewable energy is optimal. But I think the way they're portraying it is certainly, again, using outdated information, bad information. But, ultimately what the film seems to be saying is, well, we shouldn't even try to improve upon fossil fuels or coal. And we should just say, well, we really should be talking about overpopulation. I mean, to me, it's kind of a pessimistic view from an environmental perspective. I think it kind of comes off as very dystopic. And I mean, one of the things that I always think is really good about solar advocates, wind advocates, environmental advocates is we are, generally optimistic people. We want to make this technology better. This technology needs to improve, as all technology needs to improve, to be more efficient, to be more effective. And so just to say, well, this isn't perfect, so we should abandon it. I think that's I don't want to call art irresponsible, but I think there is an irresponsible message to that.
Bob, if I could jump in here, this is John Kerman with 350 KC. James has touched on this by referring to the film as outdated. I'd like to provide a little more context on that. So that section where they show the solar array in Lansing, Michigan, that was shot in 2010. The Chevy Volt that they show there where it was debuted, that occurred in 2010. That solar array was built, installed in 2008. That's why those solar panels are only 8% efficient. We're talking 12-year-old technology. There have been both massive improvements in the efficiency of solar panels since then, and something on the order of a 90% decrease in the cost of solar panels since then. And that's just one example of what's really, really wrong and fundamentally dishonest and dishonorable about this film is they use this really old footage, but they don't tell you it's really old. Richard Heinberg, who is actually the one expert in the film who I think is credible and has done a lot of good work, the interview with Richard Heinberg that Gibbs did, that was filmed in 2009. And if you notice something else, Gibbs doesn't ask him about solar and wind power and what their capabilities are. They talk about other things. So his main expert for talking about these issues, the impacts of solar panels and what they can do, is Ozzie Zenner. And who's Ozzie Zenner? Well, if you look at the credits for the film, he is a producer of the film. This is a snake eating its own tail here. There's something fundamentally dishonest about the way the film was produced.
That's a good point, John. And I think it's all technologies, they're obviously evolving. Every couple of years, they're going to double their capacity. So looking at technology that's a decade old like this, we expect to have great improvements today. And more importantly, we're going to have exponentially better product in the coming years. Joy, what's your take on this?
I am gonna respond to the dystopia comment. The movie presents a warning with, some pretty sleight of hand methods, but the dystopic reality of lower population, we see it happening right now. So that, the movie kind of, that point of the movie saying that the problem is too many people on the earth, it really was a sore point for me because there are less and less people on the earth by the month. And, the decline is more than we've seen the earth's population of humans decline. But the dystopic reality of less consumption, though, that might be a horrible thing for your Land Rover loving Leewardite, but it's not going to be so tragic to people who live in India or China, or I mean, places where we think of housing crisis being bad in Kansas City, we have no housing crisis like what is happening in third world countries. And so the thought of less consumption might be their dream. So it just depends on how you look at it, really.
Dave Mitchell's with us on the phone, so we can't actually see us. Dave.
Well, I just wanted to, Bill McKibben in his written response to Planet of the Humans, he noted that solar panels pay for themselves in less than 4 years, which means that we have at least 21 years plus of completely carbon-free energy. And I looked up some information from the Natural Resource Defense Council on renewable energy, the clear facts, and it said that for solar, it was the CO2 equivalent was 0.07 to 0.18 pounds of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour, and that natural gas makes 6 to 2 pounds of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour, and coal was 1.4 to 3.6 pounds of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. So,
Dave?
Yeah.
Would you mind speaking into the microphone a little bit? I couldn't catch some of those numbers.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Yeah, just the stats from NRDC on. Do you need me to repeat them again?
It might be helpful for people making sense of them.
Okay, all right. So basically, the stats on solar were that from NRDC was that the CO2 equivalent of for solar was 0.07 to 0.18 pounds of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour for solar. So very low. Natural gas was 0.6 pounds of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour, and coal was 1.4 to 3.6 pounds CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. And the film was arguing that renewable sources were as bad as fossil fuel sources, which just flat out isn't true.
Let's talk a little bit about biomass. The film actually spends quite a bit of time looking at biomass power as an alternative for coal. It notes that the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign has promoted moving from coal to biomass, and Bill McKibben, the founder of 350, is a leading promoter of wood chips and biomass. And we do have representatives from both 350 and Sierra Club here, so I'll look forward to their response. But the film argues that this biomass is like getting out of bed with coal companies and getting into bed with logging companies. It shows a McNeil biomass power plant that's actually burning whole trees, not just wood chips or wood waste. Apparently, this plant burns around 400,000 tons of trees annually. They're showing other biomass plants that are burning car tires and creosoted lumber, which cause toxic health issues for the local residents. For many, I think they quoted Vandana Shiva, an environmentalist, saying that the power companies are moving from burning fossil fuels to burning biomass, and it's still burning, it's still combustion. So is biomass the new fossil fuel? Is biomass sustainable? Who would like to start on that?
I'll start. As far as the Sierra Club goes, the Sierra Club's position is generally against biomass, but there can be certain cases in smaller plants where, for example, if you take biomass, some wind and energy efficiency, and if you do that, you get rid of a coal plant, where the Sierra Club will go, okay, that's a win. We can do that if it's a small one, not a large plant. But it's pretty nuanced on that. And most of the time, we can go against a biomass plant by just saying, wind, energy efficiency, solar, battery technology will take care of it. There are a few exceptions here, but we were certainly painted with a broad brush in this documentary.
Yes, you were.
There was an interesting point about needing 10 biomass plants to make up for one coal plant.
Yes.
I'm not sure about the accuracy of that data, given the inaccuracy of the other data that's brought in the film. But, you know, if you combine production from biomass and a solar and a wind farm together, is that enough? Bill, have you seen evidence that that would really actually replace one coal plant?
Sure. You know, a lot of coal plants are 400 or 500 megawatts. If you have 300 megawatts from wind, you have 50 megawatts from energy efficiency. You have a small 50 megawatt biomass plant that's doing, you know, localized, you know, biomass. That can take the place of it if you do some type of combination like that or add in a little bit of solar. But again, it's fairly nuanced. But it's going to be a small one. It should not be the heavy lifter in any way, shape, or form.
So you're generally seeing the idea of biomass as acting as that fallback from the wind and solar when the, you know, when the sun and wind settles down, you would fall back to a biomass plant? Bill?
It could be. Generally, wind and solar work well together. It's just, it depends a lot of times on transmission lines. Can the utility get enough wind in through the transmission lines or the solar? Depends where the location is. Some locations have more difficulty bringing in power than others, and that's due to who owns the grid, you know, the transmission. So it's really more of that than anything else.
John, did you want to talk?
Absolutely. This is John Kerman with 350 KC. I personally have never been persuaded that any form of biomass was a really good idea, whether it's burning wood in a power plant to generate electricity or biomass fuels like ethanol from corn or sugar cane or diesel from soy or palm oil. But the film really vilifies Bill McKibben, who is one of the co-founders of 350.org, which of course 350KC is part of. And it's, again, fundamentally dishonest. It portrays it as if Bill has been an advocate of biomass up to the point the film was released. Now, it is true that Bill did speak for a biomass burning plant at the university where he was teaching back in, I believe it was 2008, something like that. Again, this is old footage they're using. And then after the film was released, they added a sort of note at the end claiming that Bill McKibben came out against biomass after the film was released, but that is a lie. McKibben has been advocating basically against biomass, and certainly biomass burning whole trees and things like that, for several years. I mean, you can find his essays, particularly one from 2016, in which he's basically arguing against biomass. So they're fundamentally dishonest in the way they're portraying Bill in this film. And it's really, it's bizarre to see that Michael Moore has associated himself with this, because nobody that I know of has given more than Bill McKibben of his life to working on the issue of climate change. He wrote the first book for a lay audience about it, like in 1988, The End of Nature. He takes no money from 350.org for his work. He takes no money from solar or wind power companies or any of this stuff. It's really, really bad.
James, how's Renew Missouri come down on biomass?
Well, we don't consider it a renewable. I know there's a lot of push out there and there's a lot of legal efforts to define it as a renewable energy, but the reality is when you're plucking something out of the ground and you have to, like, you know, replant that, reseed that, that's not something we're going to consider renewable. And I think, you know, to the idea that biomass has to be there as a substitute for coal or any other kind of base load, to say that you have to have it there, you know, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. I mean, again, I forgot who made the point, but there is a lot of wind out there and a lot of solar out there that can work together. It's a matter of getting good wind to the places that need it. And that's where that transmission line issue comes up with. But even though the film is pretty dismissive of it, storage, batteries, those sorts of things at a utility scale level or at even a residential or small business level where you're able to have storage capacity in your house, that's not this kind of vague concept out there. That's something that there's a lot of research being done on that. There's a lot of development on that. Again, this is a case where technology is outpacing the facts in this film as they're being presented, because storage is going to be able to help supplement that. I mean, you're already seeing it in places like Minnesota, where they've denied, regulators up there have denied utilities to build natural gas plants, because they say your battery storage and your solar and the wind can take care of that.
I know for a fact that in rural parts of Missouri, solar and wind energy solutions, little shops have popped up that are taking advantage of the advance in technology and making that more available to rural households, and it's popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
Dave?
Dave Mitchell?
Yes, I guess, you know, I don't have a lot of depth on biomass. I just remember from Bill McKibben's written response to the film that he discovered that biomass was not a good thing after he supported and became an active opponent, as indicated, of biomass, and he pointed out further that burning biomass in any kind of massive way would put extra positive carbon into the atmosphere at the very time that the climate is collapsing. So, you know, it doesn't. So even, you know, maybe you could regrow all the plants that you burn, but it takes so long to regrow that the carbon neutrality involved is pretty much irrelevant if you collapse the climate system by putting just that much more extra carbon in the air. So.
Thank you.
I have kind of a layman's question here, since I'm probably the least educated of everyone on this panel on these issues, but the only thing I know about biomass is what I saw in the film, and that involved burning trees. What are some of the other candidates that they have for biomass? I mean, wasn't there some kind of switchgrass or something or whatever?
Kelp.
Switchgrass, soybeans, corn. I mean, I think you all consider that biomass as examples.
Algae is another one.
And it would be probably the consensus of this group that none of those are an effective way to go. Is that a fair thing to say? I mean, to even supplement it with,
They're easily expendable.
And you also expend a lot of power just producing it, and that is also a problem. I mean, you have to use power to make power, but that you use a lot, and a lot of water.
My fundamental problem with all the biomass sources of energy is that they're essentially mining the soil in order to produce energy. And soil is much more important. Healthy soil is far more important than energy, than producing electricity, or certainly than producing ethanol to fuel a car or diesel to fuel a car. We should not be mining the soil to make sources of energy.
Now, I would agree with you on that one from MEC's standpoint. The use of ethanol is actually a transition tool in rural areas where farmers or people making their living in rural areas are needing that kind of first step toward renewable energy. And the solar, the electric cars, like given the geographic distance between people in rural areas, they're not really helping. That's not a good solution for a lot of them, but they're willing to take that first step toward ethanol, toward biodiesel, toward compressed natural gas. And that, in our opinion, is a step in the right direction because they're at least willing to consider alternatives.
Dave, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. Just one of the articles linked from Bill McKibben's article in Rolling Stone was one by Kate Aronoff in the New Republic. That's published in just about a month ago, and And she just said that biomass is less than 2% of U.S. power and hasn't been a favorite solution of environmental groups for years. And on another note, my memory serves me that ethanol is highly questionable in terms of the amount of carbon that you put in versus the amount of carbon that you get out. And the memory serves me that it could be as low as 1-to-1 in terms of energy return on energy investment. So ethanol is really not a way to go in any kind of long range plan, in my opinion.
Sure, thanks, Dave. Let's jump into another area of the film. They spent a lot of time talking about financial questions, where money's coming from. One of the questions the film raises is why bankers and industrialists are only focusing on green energy solutions. They raise the question of if there's a profit motive that prefers promoting solar, wind, biomass energy alternatives over reducing consumption. They spend a fair amount of time showing Michael Bloomberg's donations to the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal, and again, going after 350 with funding from Rockefeller, showing that Sierra Club's received large donations from the timber industry, showing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. talking to a group of petroleum insiders, telling them that solar wind projects actually generates new gas, natural gas power plants, we'll get behind it. Koch brothers connections through Guardian Glass, which is a major supplier of solar cell glass, and noting that treehugger.com owned by Georgia Pacific, which is a Koch brothers company. And they talked about Goldman Sachs, which is producing or promoting the growth of sugarcane, South America, leading to deforestation for those ethanol products that we've been talking about. So my question to the group here, has the green movement been taken over by corporate capitalists? Who wants to start on that? John?
The people fighting us would be surprised to hear that. Here's another problem. Here's another problem with this film, is it makes statements about things that are utterly obvious as if there's some great revelation of a secret conspiracy. Why should we be surprised that the companies, the financial firms that want to make money are focusing on solutions that they see as being able to help them continue making money? There's no surprise in that. But to argue that green groups have been taken over, co-opted, subverted by that, there may be some, but I certainly don't think that's the case with the Sierra Club, even though I'm not working with the Sierra Club now. And it's definitely not the case with 350.org. We don't take corporate money at 350.org. This Rockefeller Foundation is not a corporation. The Rockefeller Foundation is a foundation, and they fund lots of good work. So it's just nonsense.
Mostly, I've got to correct that. All foundations, technically, 501c3 dictates that they must be corporations. So they are corporations.
Okay, in a legal sense, yes,
right.
but not what they're saying, not what they mean when they say corporations are taking over. Technically, 350.org is a corporation.
Exactly.
But that's because that's the only way you can have a legal existence as an entity in this country. But that's not what they're implying. They're implying that for-profit corporations have taken over the Sierra Club, 350.org. They'd probably say it about ME's Metropolitan Energy Center and Renew Missouri if you were national groups too.
Right. I think
more dishonesty.
The point that they're saying is that the foundations are a tax vehicle for these corporations, and the people who are involved in leadership of these foundations are doing it for corporate reasons. And that, I think there is some truth to that, but where else are good meaning organizations going to get the amount of funding that they need to be truly effective nationwide in making change happen? If the money doesn't come from the money bags, there's not a lot of other resources that are available that are going to take care of that huge of a job to be done.
I think just logically speaking, what it seems like they're using the fact that it's a corporation as a pejorative without putting any, definition on what they mean by using the term.
Right.
It's not accidental though, it's deliberate.
I think there was some focus on, for instance, the logging companies that are contributing money to Beyond Coal because they know that that promotes biomass. So, I mean, there are some, anytime we're transitioning to new technology, obviously big business is going to have to get involved. Nothing is going to become successful until big business embraces it and becomes part of them. So the difficulty and kind of what they're circling around is how do we transition to something that's going to be profitable enough to draw the big corporations and become a sustainable solution that solves it, but still maintain the purity of providing the best solutions for the environment.
Bob, this is Bill Griffith. Of course, I'm with the Sierra Club. One thing I saw about the documentary was the question it's trying to solve, or questions seem to be capitalism and overpopulation. Most of these environmental groups represented here and other ones, that's not their primary purpose. It's just try to solve or get a hold of climate change. And if you look at it through that lens, this looks a lot differently, because with capitalism, we could have this argument for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years about who has a better form of government, whether it's Sweden or the United States. However, climate change, we are dealing with a very narrow window of 10 to 20 years. And we will have more time, we'll have a much better way of discussing socialism versus capitalism if the planet is not on fire. And so we are looking at different question to answer here. So if Michael Bloomberg wants to drop $500 million over the next 10 years to form Beyond Carbon to go with Beyond Coal, that's fine, because in the Sierra Club, he is not on the board. He does not get to make decisions. The only thing he gets to do, and I do know this, is put up a matrix of accountability for the Beyond Coal or Beyond Carbon campaign like a business. But I remember when in Kansas, we were the first chapter of the Sierra Club to go into a Public Utility Commission meeting and try to do something, in this case, about natural gas in 2006. And it was my 1099 lawyer and me, and no one else around. And that was tough. And now we have as many lawyers as utility companies. We have engineers, we have analysts, and we have PR folks. And we are as heavily loaded as utilities or any other groups out there. So the money is fine for that because we're good stewards of it. And, I'm not a fan of Jeff Bezos, but if Jeff Bezos wants to drop 50 million on this issue, that's fine with me.
Yeah, I just want to kind of add a little nuance from my perspective anyway, which is the subtext of what they talk about in the movie of, the never-ending growth of capitalism and things like they didn't use this term, but planned obsolescence. We know that capitalism is designed in such a way that it works by growing and growing and growing and growing. And it seems to me that both of these fights need to be had. Yes, we need to solve the climate change problem as much as we can. And one way to help do that is to try and resist the damage that unrestrained capitalism can do. As far as the subtext is concerned, I think that resonates to some degree with me. Although the technical things about arguing otherwise, that's, anyway.
That's
go ahead.
That's a good point, Bill. This is John Kerman again. There was a valuable movie to be made here to consider whether capitalism can be made sustainable given its fixation on perpetual growth. And there's a valid questions to be asked about the role of population growth, because the population is continuing to grow by about 1 billion people every 14 or 15 years. And overconsumption. But this movie is not that movie, because it is so dishonest in its attacks on wind and solar and the people working to deal with climate change. It's been referred to multiple times as a documentary, but I really think that's a misnomer, because a documentary filmmaker, while they certainly can have a point of view, they have a responsibility to accurately represent facts. And Gibbs did not do that in this film. Gibbs and Zahner, the two producers of this film, completely misrepresented the facts about solar and wind energy. Biomass is in a little different category. And the facts about people like Bill McKibben and the Sierra Club. And I thought it was really unfair to Al Gore too, even though I have my own issues with Al Gore. This is not a documentary. This is a polemic.
Mm-hmm. They cut off Al Gore's testimony. They didn't include the rest of his statement. They said, how did you feel about the sugarcane fields being put up and the Amazon forest being cut down? And he said something like, I forgot. They cut the audio right there and move on with the movie. That was clearly a longer statement. No one just says, I forgot in a Senate hearing.
Again, dishonest.
Yeah.
It's dishonestly edited, dishonestly presented. Mm-hmm. It's dishonest from top to bottom.
John, do you have a theory or a speculation as the motive?
I have not found a good answer to that. Again, Gibbs has been working on this film since at least 2009, because again, his interview with Richard Heinberg, Richard has said on his own website that occurred in 2009. So he's been working on this for a long time. So I think he's still kind of stuck in 2009 and what were the facts about wind and solar back then, although I still think he misrepresents things. And that's another aspect about this. This film was originally released July 31st of last year, and it dropped like a stone. It went completely unnoticed. It was only after Gibbs roped in Michael Moore and Michael Moore's fame. Apparently they went to school together. And it was re-released on YouTube on Earth Day that it got all this attention because of what Michael Moore was able to bring. He was on the Colbert Late Show with Colbert as executive producer. But it's really Gibbs' film, so it shouldn't be. I don't know what Moore's motivation is. There's something really, really off about his participation in this film. That because of his connection to Gibbs from when they went to school together, that he got involved with this and apparently didn't fact check anything.
I have a theory about Gibbs's reasons for caring about it and wanting to produce it. It shows when he grew up, he was a naturalist, and he grew up it shows him pictures of him in the forest somewhere. And so he has an affinity for trees. And he ends the film, of course, with the scene in the Amazon, the orangutan losing his home and having to climb up a dead tree with brakes. And it was heartbreaking, but he took that's Gibbs's lens right there. And so when we're talking about, even if one coal plant could be replaced by a wind farm and a solar farm and a biomass plant, that is still 3 times at least, probably more, because they do take up more space, 3 times the space on this earth than that one coal plant took up. And so as a conservationist, he's probably looking at that as another reason to clear cut and get rid of forest. That is, forests are one of the major ways that the earth is reclaiming its carbon from the air. So that might have something to do with it.
It could be.
A big point of the film seemed to be the overconsumption, looking at renewables, a way of sustaining our high levels of consumption, and trying to persuade us to back away from that and move into more, more ways of saving the planet. At some point, they make a comment about the political right wanting to find more oil and the political left wanting to install more solar cells. and that both of those solutions seem to fail to address the actual problem of overconsumption. Some of the quotes from the film were that we're running into the planet's limits, available farmland is peaked, available water is peaked, rivers are running dry because we're using so much. They point out that infinite growth is suicide. We have to have our ability to consume reined in. Less must be the new more. One of the comments was, it's not the carbon molecule that's destroying the planet, it is us. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of overconsumption, and what role do we have as environmentalists and green energy people to help reduce consumption? Who wants to jump, James?
Yeah, because I think it is important, and I know I run a group called Renew Missouri, but one of the things that we're really focused on right now is energy efficiency. And I think you're seeing, you're seeing a lot of shift from renewable energy. I mean, even for us, we are moving towards how do we put in programs and products, and working with the utility companies, working with large scale customers, working with the residential customers, working with people in multifamily, low income housing to cut down their consumption, to cut the demand side for usage. And I'll tell you, Missouri has a really good law set up on that. We let utility companies invest in that the same way they'd invest in building coal plants, solar panels, all these other things. They're able to see a return on their investment. Look, we're talking about money, and we're talking about like attracting money. Utilities and the creation of energy, there's more money in the politics of utilities than there are in taxation. More people pay money for utilities, and more people are engaged with that than they are with actually paying taxes. This is a lot of money we're talking about here, but you're talking about being able to say, yes, we should make people's homes more efficient. We should be able to make the grid more efficient. That to me is where the future of this is going. And I mean, it's too bad they didn't take that as a solution in this. And I think that is because this was kind of an outdated film, and kind of a film that wanted you to, feel like, oh my gosh, this is completely hopeless. But I think that is where we are seeing a lot of progress. And I think you're seeing a lot of progress. I can't speak to, globally how this operates, but I can tell you in this country, one, you're seeing demand flatten, plateauing, and there's a lot of money in it too.
Dave?
Yeah, I think the film is really it's really profoundly unfortunate that they attempt to attack renewable energy in the way they do. That it poisons the well, according using the phrase from Aronoff's article in the New Republic. But they do really point out to the reality that humanity is in serious overshoot. And I looked up the Global Footprint Network, and an article from April 2018 entitled "Has Humanity's Ecological Footprint Reached Its Peak?" And they point out that the demand for renewable resources remains 68% higher than what the planet can renew. So that means that at this point in time, our collective footprint is using 1.7 Earths. So, Jeff Gibbs, at the end of the film, he points to that, and so he's trying to they're both trying to raise alarm, both Jeff Gibbs and Michael Moore, to this reality, and they're trying to say that the religion, quote unquote, of wind and solar will not save us, which is kind of true, but so they are trying to raise the alarm and change the conversation. But as John Kerman said here, John's correct that this is not the film that can address those issues, because they so completely mischaracterize their data.
Boy, Dave, if they had brought up some more concrete stats like you did with we're using 1.7 Earths, all of us, that would change some minds, in my opinion.
Well, that's according to the Global Footprint Network, and I have no reason to believe that that's not true. So
This goes again to what I was saying, that there were worthwhile questions to be addressed here. There were worthwhile things to be addressed, but the dishonest attack on the people trying to do the work and on the dishonest representation of what wind and solar can do completely undermines the entire film, in my opinion. They offer us nothing. As James was saying, it's a dystopic film. It seems almost designed to leave people feeling hopeless, as if there's nothing to do. Ozzy Zenner in the film literally claims that it's worse to use wind and solar than to use fossil fuels, which is a lie. It is a flat out lie. But he claims that. So if we take that to be true, what do? Do we keep using fossil fuels? The result of that is climate cataclysm. That's not an answer. People have to have energy. Now, there are absolutely legitimate questions to be asked about what kinds of lifestyles worldwide can be supported by wind and solar, can be supported by truly renewable energy. But arguing that renewable energy is worse than fossil fuels is complete and utter, I can't say that, FCC, nonsense.
Thank you for not saying that. The idea of lifestyle, and let's bring that in because we've mentioned overpopulation, a little bit of overconsumption, overpopulation. And I want to hear everybody's comment on this in our last couple of minutes. But I know a lot of people that are very serious about other countries reducing their population. And for me, there's really a big question of first world countries reducing their overconsumption. I'm not sure it's a question that we're overpopulating as much as there's a small but very, very harsh group of people that are over-consuming. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, to me, go ahead, Joy.
I think it's easier to point the finger at somebody else and demand that they fix something than it is really to change. Now, I say that, but changing your own habits is super hard.
Yeah.
But it would be more responsible and more compassionate to the rest of the humans that are occupying this planet if we would focus on our own consumption habits.
It's not either or, it's both and. The fact of the matter is the world population 7.6 billion people now. It's growing by about 1 billion people every 14 or 15 years. But, Dave was mentioning that the Global Footprint Network has calculated that globally, every year, we're using the equivalent of 1.7 Earths. Well, we don't have a 0.7 extra Earth. But more importantly, we also need to look at the fact that if everyone lived the way the average American lives as far as consumption, we'd need 5 Earths. So overconsumption absolutely is an issue. As I say, even if everybody stopped having children immediately today, if the population kept growing, we would still wreck the world. But conversely, even if everybody in the world adopted the lifestyle of Gandhi today, we would still wreck the world if population keeps growing. I'm getting those turned around there. But the point is, we have to address both. But it gets really tricky, and you have to be really sensitive when you start talking about how many children people should have. It doesn't mean we shouldn't address it, but it is a very tricky business.
Bill, we've got 4 minutes left. Dave, do you want to step in here?
yeah, I just Dave Borlace in his Just Have a Think video response to Planet of the Humans. He cited some data saying that if the whole world ate like Indians eat, only 22% of the habitable land needed would be needed to feed the world, and habitable land meaning agriculturally productive land. But if everybody ate like U.S. citizens eat, we would need 137% of the land available. So you know, it is a question of both population and consumption, and it matters. It matters a great deal. Our choices, and you know, I think I'll just we are in serious overshoot, and the film does try to point that out. But I'll read this one little statement from Limits to Growth, which is a study done, a computer study done on human impact, and basically they say once the population and economy have overshot the physical limits of the earth, which we have done, there are only two ways back: involuntary collapse caused by escalating shortages and crises, or controlled reduction of the ecological footprint by deliberate social choice. So, you know, there's only one way forward, and the way forward is to, for every society and all of us to reduce our footprint. And we know all sorts of ways to do that. It was only a question of will at every level of society. So.
We've talked about the how this technology, solar wind, keeps improving. And a side effect that we haven't talked about is how it does make us more efficient, not only in our solar and wind, but in our homes. An object comes to mind is induction cooktops, new electric ways of cooking that gets the fossil fuel out of your kitchen, and even more efficient than the traditional electric stove. And the you know, the mini split, the ductless mini splits, heating, cooling, again, very efficient. And the new battery technology that's driving the electric cars. These are all solutions that are helping us more or less maintain the lifestyle we're used to in this country, but it allows us to have a much smaller carbon footprint than we would otherwise. And moving to things like that are steps that we can take right now. We don't have to wait for somebody else to do that. We can be regearing our home to be this super efficient electric environment. We can start buying electric cars now. And as the utilities company transition to wind and solar, and here in Kansas City, Missouri in general, and Kansas, I mean, our utility companies are doing a really good job of moving to wind and solar as quickly as possible. You know, we at home can be ready to take advantage of those when that happens. So I think we're out of time. I want to thank all of our guests, John Fish, 350.org, Joy Ellsworth, Metropolitan Energy Center, James Owen, Renew Missouri, Bill Griffith, Sierra Club, and many other things, and Dave Mitchell, longtime Kansas City environmentalist. And I am Bob Grove. I'm the president of the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City. We'll turn this back over to you, Bill.
Let me thank Bob Grove then for hosting this and putting it together and getting a wonderful panel. I want to thank everybody. It was a great discussion. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.